Right, hello my little pals, I hope you're okay and you've had a nice and happy Halloween and it's been a good weekend and you're still okay in the unprecedented times of the pandemic. Um, I'm doing this lecture just now, it's a horrible dreary night, so I hope you don't mind all this sort of dripping and stuff happening outside. Hopefully it's not too noisy. But essentially I made the assessment available last week. I haven't had too many sort of complaints or anything about it. Everyone seems to be relatively happy about what options they're doing and that sort of thing. I'll have a sort of engagement, I think possibly next week, an engagement meeting just to make sure that everyone's okay and checking in and everything. So I'll do that next week at the sort of normal making lectures available time at 10. So we'll make sure that everyone's sort of okay. Alrighty. So, computer game mechanics, this is really nothing to do with anything, it's just really out of interest, I suppose, and I decided to put this into the course at some point because someone actually asked me, what is a computer game mechanic, and I thought, I don't really know how to explain that particularly well, so I thought that I would do this lecture so that people could watch it and read it and possibly get a better sort of idea. So as you can see, it is a sort of technical aspect of it. Game mechanics are really the player sort of interacts with the game mechanics, and the game mechanics sort of interact with each other, and then of course the gameplay is more or less sort of exposed, it transpires through all of that, and that's how the gameplay is in fact fabricated. So we've got a sort of Lego image here. Here's a nice sort of physical game mechanic. This is how bullets sort of ricochets. You've got another sort of game mechanic here. This is the sort of Dark Sith in the Star Wars The Force Unleashed. I think it's number 2 or number 1. Anyway, he's actually using his force power to bring down the Superstar Destroyer, and that is a sort of game mechanic. So it's a sort of physical, logical, enforced, imposed rule/constraint ability within the actual game itself. So you can see him sort of bringing down that particular thing, and you can lift things in the game as well. So a game mechanic, okay? As a sort of technical thing, I have a number of references here that you can look up. So I've got a book on game mechanics, advanced game design. You can look at that. This is a paper, designing games, or is it a book as well? And this is another sort of paper towards a comprehensive model for analysis and definition of game mechanics as well, and actually defining game mechanics and what they are. So if you're wanting to look into this any depth at all, do have a look at these particular references, and I'm sure you'll find it interesting. So in terms of structure, what is mechanics? It's of course a sort of branch of engineering and physics. What are game mechanics? As I've sort of said, the game mechanics, you interact with the game mechanics. The game mechanics sort of interact with each other and the objects within the game in order to produce the gameplay. And what makes games fantastic and interactive and totally different is that in every other form of media, when you consider a book or a movie, everything is always predestined to occur. And in a game, that doesn't happen. What sort of happens in a game is that the game mechanics are merely programmed onto a disc, and they interact, and there can be a completely different outcome from what you actually expect. So unpredictability as well is a good sort of variable there. Mechanics and events during gameplay, why games are different, I've sort of said why that is the case, due to the interactivity, the unpredictability. Rules define games, some categorizations, there's types of mechanics as well. There's 5 sort of different types of game mechanics. There's core game mechanics, there's secondary game mechanics, primary game mechanics, satellite game mechanics, and the sort of types of basic game mechanic. Now, I haven't really heard these being used any great particular sort of length in any sort of documentation or whatever during the course of the years where people have been submitting things to the course, but people actually do look at sort of game mechanics and manipulating game mechanics for honours projects and things like that. So in terms of things like games design documents, technical design documents, it may actually be a thing to actually split that down into the game mechanics. Maybe a good sort of thing to split the implementation down into game mechanics as well. And it's also kind of nice to know what you're slightly on about when you're talking about game mechanics anyway. So what are mechanics? What is mechanics in general? The branch of physics that deals with the motion of material objects. So basically when subjected to forces or displacements and the subsequent effects of the bodies on their environment. Okay, so the term mechanic generally refers to the motion of large objects. You do get things like quantum mechanics as well, but generally sort of large objects. So that's what we sort of mean by mechanics in general. When you sort of think of a mechanic, a car mechanic, a very sort of technical sort of person that you take your car to and they generally charge you a fortune, give you an MOT certificate, and it's something you have absolutely no comprehension of whatsoever. Well, if you're someone like myself, I just take it to the mechanic, the car mechanic, and say, there you are, fix my car please, and give me a phone number or a bill at the end of it, and that's cool. And it generally is a digit like a phone number that you get back, so everything is wrong with it. Okay, game mechanics are the rules, processes, data at the heart of the game. They define how the play actually progresses, what happens, when, what conditions actually determine victory, defeat. So they are a combination of rules, logistics, interactions, aesthetics. They are the core of what a game truly is. And you can, of course, fixate in particular mechanics. Core mechanics, for example, if you're looking at Mario, we'll look at Mario as an extended example. He's always jumping around. That's a core mechanic. He's got to jump, he's got to run, he's got to kind of jump over obstacles, elude things as well, elude dangers. Those are the sort of core game mechanics. Pick up objects as well. Those are the sort of core game mechanics that Mario has to integrate into that particular game. But there are satellite ones, other game mechanics that aren't necessary really for that task, but help. So, for example, when he puts on his little sort of flying hat and he flies around the level, you're going, it's not really particularly necessary to the core of the game, but it's a helpful aspect. Same perhaps when he becomes invincible for a short period of time. That's like a sort of satellite game mechanic. You get other sort of game mechanics as well, like opposition game mechanics, like undefeatable bad guys that try to seek you out and destroy you, that sort of thing. So they are the core of what the game actually truly is. They're interactions and relationships that remain when all of the aesthetics, all of the technology, all the graphics, all the story is actually stripped away, and they are exactly what remains. Okay? So, I mean, if you were to strip everything away from Mario, for example, you'd just be left with a wee character, a number of obstacles, and a sort of assault course, really. And that's what you would have to navigate through once you take all of that away. Okay? Okay, it's a rule about how a game works. The constructs of rules or methods designed for interaction with the game state, yes, thus providing the gameplay. Okay, so mechanics, mechanisms based on rule sets that compose the logical functioning of a game. So I'm probably giving far too many definitions here, but it's nice to actually fixate on one and get it sort of clear in your brain. Then they become predictable to the player when a set of rules has a unique and meaningful interaction. They are the form that a player perceives the inner workings of the game world. Now, you can automatically sort of think of, I've always wanted a sort of Magneto game, as you can imagine, and all you can really see there is a sort of first-person view going around with a hand sort of sticking out, lifting metallic objects, crushing people, that sort of thing. And once all of that is really, that doesn't seem particularly complex to do, but to put all the aesthetics of the sort of Magneto costume, helmet, the X-Men branding, all of that onto that, it's a very, very sort of simple logistical idea of in terms of interactions and physics and rules and constraints. But after you put all of that on it, it becomes a sort of different ball game. It's difficult to actually separate these things in your brain. So that's what we're trying to sort of do in this. Okay, they become perceptible to the player. Okay, so this is what I'm saying, perceptible to the player. And if you think of the Matrix, they are in fact perceptible, but perhaps a bit invisible at the same time. For example, in a game, you realise if you can actually walk through a wall, these obstacles are there. You sort of realise if you can jump a little bit higher with a particular character than with another, and you realise that these mechanics make the slightest little sort of bit of difference as well. And it's how you sort of work out the inner workings of the game. So, obviously, in some games, these rules can be sort of slightly bent in some ways, yeah? When you're considering things like cheat codes and stuff like that, God modes, the ability to fly for short periods of time, or whatever sort of rewards you're wanting to actually implement into that game. So then we'll get Neo there fighting Morpheus, right? And then he sort of starts to understand and perceive the inner workings of the simulation that he is in, okay? And eventually he becomes a complete and utter master of it. And that's what happens to us in games. And sometimes these things are perceptible to a very, very sort of easy extent, shall we say. But sometimes they don't really particularly travel well. I've often said that the Super Mario games, in Super Mario 64, the three sequence jump was very, very easy to master, didn't really particularly move well to the GameCube. And then when you get it into the Switch, once again, it's a wee bit not really particularly happy with it. And when we're talking about particular games like Super Mario 64, Super Mario Sunshine as well. And then when you sort of move on to Super Mario Odyssey, the three sort of sequence jump is in fact implemented almost perfectly. But anyway, you start to perceive these particular rules, these constrictions that you're subjected to in the game, and you start to work around them. Yeah, and then you become a master of them. So this is Neo here, actually sort of stopping bullets, right? Because he becomes really, really clued up how to work in the Matrix. So here's Morpheus here. This is a sparring program, similar to the programmed reality of the Matrix. It has a set of basic rules of gravity. What you must learn is that these rules are no different from the rules of a computer system. Some of them can be bent, others can be broken. Understand? Then hit me if you can. Stop trying to hit me. So it's very, very sort of good example here. So here we've got the Nintendo Switch controller. I've got one here, right? And all you're doing there is you're pressing a button, and I love that. And Mario jumps. Okay? When I was first delivering this lecture, I was doing it in front of about 100 people in a great big huge lecture hall. So I was trying to make this as fluid as possible in my computer games development, technology, programming sort of way. So I came up with this sort of animation. And I do realise that now that I'm recording them, I can simply just switch on the Nintendo Switch and tell you exactly what I mean. Jump, whoop, it's a mechanic, yeah? So it jumps, yay, good stuff. Sonic, his spin dash happens at 100 spins per second. That's again a mechanic. So you do that, whee, yep. I was quite proud of that little piece of animation too, to be honest. But once again, I can actually show you on the Mega Drive Mini, the only Sega console I actually have actually. So that's another mechanic. Other examples, a character walks at 1 meter per second. Players take alternate turns. Those are other sort of mechanics and rules. Pawns capture diagonally, okay? In a board game, really these things are enforced by a rule book, yeah? This is what this says here, sorry if you can't read that. But in a video game, it's the computer code that really enforces it. But these are still the mechanics because they define the behaviour of the game. So the computer code does enforce it to a certain extent. And as we all sort of know, computer code can in fact be slightly broken. Or it can be filled with errors. or you might not get the result that you particularly expect. Now, no one believes me when I say this, but I was playing Crazy Golf in the Spectrum in 1987, and I swear to God, I hit the ball out of the screen. Not the ball coming out of the screen like in a weird fantasy sort of way, but there was a sort of border around the screen. I hit the ball, I took aim, and then it actually went outside the border of the screen, and it wasn't supposed to do that. And it was stuck outside the border and couldn't get back in. And then the game, of course, crashed. Yeah? So these things are in fact breakable in some ways. So when you think of chess, you think every particular piece there has a mechanic. It's all built in mechanics. It's alternate turns, I should say. And then, of course, all the pieces start in a particular place. That, once again, is a mechanic. And they all move in different ways and can capture in different ways. Castling in chess is more or less a mechanic. Yeah? Queening in chess, once again, a mechanic. So, the rules designed for the interaction with the game state that provides the gameplay. That's really what it is. An event happens during the gameplay. So these are the events that happen. Right? That's the definition of the mechanics. The events. The mechanics essentially interact with each other, and these events unfold. So if you think of a sort of beat-em-up game like Mortal Kombat, you've got all these mechanics. You've got the ability to block, you've got the hits, you've got the two characters interacting with each other. They all have life, a set level of life. They have the ability to sort of move and take life damage and all that sort of thing happens. But essentially you don't really know what's going to happen. So the events in the confines of these mechanics in fact unfold depending on the player's skill as well. Oh, I said that earlier. So we've got Scorpion and Sub-Zero sort of fighting here. That's all we know at this particular point. If you were to sit down and watch two people fight with Scorpion and Sub-Zero, you wouldn't have a bloody clue who was going to win, unless you sort of had prior experience and thought, Bobby's better. You wouldn't have a clue. And then, of course, during the course of the round, these mechanics interact with each other and the events eventually unfold. And there's Scorpion doing his fatality and burning poor Sub-Zero at the end. Yeah. Okay. So why games are different? Almost in every other form of entertainment, whether that's a novelization, a movie, a play, a screenwriter, and this is why games are utterly fantastic, and in some ways more complex, but yet again more simplistic, yet and at the same time more simplistic than some of these other things, because they require perfect planning. And games require perfect planning as well. But really what we're doing here is we're just implementing a set of mechanics and letting those mechanics go and interact, and hopefully everything will be fine, but we don't necessarily know what the outcome will be. In novelization movies and plays, they've got to be planned utterly meticulously to the extent where every possible conceivable eventuality is written, predetermined, and then eventually you get the ending that is again been predetermined. A screenwriter, novelist, choreographer has decided every action, line, motion a long time ago, a long series of predefined events. Now, if some of you are in fact a fan of Stephen King's It, there are sort of three different versions. There is the novelization, which sort of starts with the phone calls, and then there's sort of flashbacks that happen, and then of course there's the sort of mini-series that follows the same sort of kind of formula. You see them all as adults at the beginning, phone calls are made, and then there's a number of flashbacks, and then the new movies actually have them all as children at the beginning, and then the second one is primarily adults, and it's a different sort of way of doing it. It's a different way of presenting the story, but essentially all of the events are in fact defined within the constraints of all Now, the biggest sort of thing, the biggest problem I've ever had with it is that it loses its scariness, of course, when adults are involved. It's okay trying to frighten a bunch of children with a killer clown who is in fact almost like a teenager himself, but when you bring adults into the equation, it doesn't quite work. When you think of the complexity of something like Game of Thrones, and once again, I got the ending I wanted. The dragon killed everyone, was unharmed, and that was fine. That was awesome. But think of how long the entire world was waiting at an episode every bloody week. And that was all kind of predefined, or was it? It wasn't really predefined, to be honest. But you know, they eventually had to come up with an ending that suited people, or the majority of people, or come up with an ending at last, because it became too bloody complicated. But anyway, all predefined events. And up until this point, when the Night King actually gets, is it Viserion? They were doing incredibly well. Everything was brilliant. It was the last season that sort of screwed it all up. Okay, Star Wars as an example. It's all predefined, right? The Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones. So here we have them, okay? But the Phantom Menace appearing here. Attack of the Clones, yeah. Revenge of the Sith. We have A New Hope. We have The Empire Strikes Back. We have Return of the Jedi. We have Star Wars, The Force Awakens. Then we have Star Wars, the Last Jedi. And obviously, I didn't actually finish it at that point. And then in between, we have Rogue One. And then Solo, yeah. And then I've completely, utterly forgotten, because I wrote this a couple of years ago, to put in the Rise of Skywalker, yeah. But of course, because the stories become so complex, they are workable, but yet at the same time, you get all these people that have never, ever, ever decided to go out and lose their virginity, or whatever. Geeks, basically, like myself. They can always sort of, poke holes within the story. And one particular one that I've always found a bit irritating, not irritating, but I suppose blatantly obvious. If you knew a bit of Latin, you would probably be able to predict that Darth Vader was in fact Luke Skywalker's father, because Latin Darth Vader is in fact Dark Father. And then, of course, in the movie, he more or less calls him Darth by name, like it was supposed to be his name, only the Master of Evil, Darth. And he doesn't actually call him Anakin or Vader or anything. And it's almost as if there was only at that point, back in a New Hope, to be one of them, yeah? But then, of course, they realised we can make tons of money by having tons of Darths, tons of Sith, tons of Jedi. And that's where the story starts to sort of change. But anyway, there we go, all predefined. Can you imagine actually trying to predefine all of that? Now, when you consider what I said last week about people sort of using their imagination and coming up with their own sort of endings to movies, if you can in fact sit there and visualise a movie from beginning to end without it being broken, you're doing very, very well, because it's not really the way the human mind works. It's not as if you can sit there and go, I'm going to play a movie to myself that I've seen 100 times and watch it. Doesn't work that way. What sort of happens is you clip through it. You go, no, I didn't really particularly like that, but I'm going to play the best part of it over and over and over again. Yeah? So, events are not authored directly. The mechanics are designed, and those mechanics then generate events during the gameplay. So, have a look at this. Tyler Sylvester gives a very good example in his book. And if you watch this sort of YouTube clip, it's basically Super Mario Galaxy. So in Super Mario Galaxy, you can watch this. I try to jump to make Mario jump over a pit. I miss. Mario touches lava. His backside bursts into flames, and he shoots up, screaming in pain. Right? So he goes ah, because his ass is being burned. Okay. He flies through the air. And I managed to direct him to safe landing, to land in safety. Okay, so here are the mechanics. Okay, the jumping, the missing, bursting into flames, yeah, flying into the air in vain, screaming again, maneuvering to safety. Okay, so here we go. That's activated by the jump button, gravity, yeah, explosive butt lava reaction, and the ability to control in midair. Yeah, so that's what sort of happens. The jumping, controlled by the jump button, yeah, gravity, jumping, missing, once again, gravity, bursting into flames, the explosive butt lava reaction, flying into the air, the screaming, maneuvering to safety. So that's why games are in fact different, okay? We'll just sort of look at that again, okay? That's where all the scenarios and the mechanics all sort of tie up, okay? But remember that the Super Mario Galaxy disc doesn't contain any of these events, only the mechanics, yeah? So none of these things are actually pre-written into the actual game cartridge. If we have one, let's see, Super Mario Odyssey. Super Mario Odyssey seems to be in my Nintendo Switch, but none of these are actually on that particular little cartridge. This is the Zelda cartridge. Is it written that he is, going to, get hit by enemies, die within the game? No, and it's not actually predetermined. It's not even predetermined that he's going to sort of wake the windfish. These things are there, and only through interacting with the game mechanics do they become so. Yeah. So you're just producing all these events. In all probability, these events will never, well, in the case of the Mario Galaxy event, in all probability, these events will never act out exactly in the same way again. You'd probably never be able to sort of get that exact same scenario happening again. So, game designers do not design events, we design a system of mechanics that in fact generate events. Okay? So here we're looking at Tetris. I did not mean to do that. Okay, so when you consider the mechanics in Tetris, let's have a look at them. We can split Tetris into 4 game mechanics. So think of it, the blocks are falling from the top of the screen. You've got to then put them into some sort of logical order. That's all fine, and you've got to create lines, okay? And eventually get to Tetris, which is 4 lines, yeah? All these different sort of blocks as well. So you can split Tetris into these particular mechanics. We can split it into 4. So you've got a rotation system where the blocks spawn. What position do they spawn? How they rotate? The sort of wall kick, whatever. Okay. Randomizing mechanics as well. What particular order of sequence of blocks are spawning? You've got a scoring system, so a line clears, back-to-back lines, T-spins, combos. You've got the mobility. That's actually 5 mechanics. Manipulation, rotating, dropping. Incremental speed difficulty as well, the levels where the blocks get faster. So it can in fact be split into 5 mechanics, not 4. But there you go, that's how Tetris is actually split into the mechanics, okay? Once you get rid of the sort of sugary coating of the gameplay. Okay, many definitions of what a game is, and there is no general consensus. Many agree that rules are a necessary constituent. So the game development community usually prefers the term game mechanics to game rules. Would you believe? I didn't actually believe it until recently, but it's apparently true. So rules are considered printed instructions and the player is aware of them explicitly. Mechanics are hidden from the player, implemented in the software for which the player is given no direct sort of user interface, okay? You just seem to know them. What's happening in my slides here? Okay. Sickert, 2008, in defining game mechanics, proposes the following categorization. So you have core mechanics, you have primary mechanics, and you have secondary mechanics. So in core mechanics, these are the mechanics that are repeatedly used by agents to achieve a systematically rewarded end game state. Okay. Primary mechanics. These are the core mechanics that can be directly applied to solving these particular challenges that lead to the desired end state. Okay? They are readily available, they're explained in the early stages of the game. Every game has a sort of tutorial level perhaps, and despite the fact that not all games are serious games, i.e. games that are used for education and training purposes, every game has a particular learning goal in mind, which is to teach the player how to intuitively use that game. If they can't use the game, then the game designers are doing something wrong, or the player is doing something wrong, okay? So, secondary mechanics, they are core mechanics that ease the player's interaction, okay? And secondary mechanics are either available occasionally, so when you think of things like the invincibility star, yeah, or the flying hat in Mario, these things sort of ease your way through the level, but they're only available every now and again, okay? So only available occasionally, or require the combination with a sort of primary mechanic in order to be sort of functional, okay? So here we have another sort of definition. Again, core mechanics is there. So we've got these academics here. I've got the references before. Maranhão, Mendonça, Da Rocha, Franco, and Maya, whatever. 2016, so that's a relatively recent one. You may wish to look up, I might have a look and see if there's more sort of up-to-date ones. Core game mechanics is a set of activities that are undertaken more frequently, absolutely indispensable to winning, and most important is the player has to deal with them the most. Okay? Satellite game mechanics, they enrich the core gameplay without the increasing complexity. Okay? And there are three types. Okay? So we have enhancement mechanics, enhancing the already existing core mechanics. That can happen in two ways. It can be add-ons, there can be power-ups, that sort of thing. There's alternative mechanics, so alternative the existing core mechanics requiring a bit of new learning. Opposition mechanics, and the main purpose is to hinder and obstruct the player and should be circumvented. Okay? So, core game mechanics, once again we're kind of looking at the Mario example. So you get your regular jump, continuous jump, you get your triple jump, you get your sort of side somersault, wall kick. All of these things have to be more or less sort of learned. You kind of go through Mario, you hit a little question box or something like that, and it tells you exactly how to execute these things. Sometimes it can be incredibly ponderous to even stop. Most people try not to bother, to be perfectly honest. They just try to sort of pick it up. But eventually, invariably, you've got to sort of say to yourself, well, if I want to be successful in the game, I'd better take the time to go through this learning curve. I was never like that. Whenever I'm playing games, I just think, give it to me, I'll work it out, which is probably not the best sort of way to do it. I had a friend back in high school, and he would always read the instruction book from cover to cover before he put the goddamn cartridge in the console. And it always used to bug the hell out of me. I'm not even joking about that. You're like, oh my god, I can't believe he's actually managing to read this entire thing before he even plays it. You know, but it did pay dividends, I've got to say. I remember at one particular stage, I was really struggling with Street Fighter 2 in the Super Nintendo, and I thought, what is going on here? I'm losing all the time. And then I decided, oh, I'll read the instruction manual, maybe there'll be something in there. And it said, blocking is the key to survival. And ever since then, I've been a god of Street Fighter 2 because I'm absolutely brilliant at it. And that was the little thing, blocking is the key to survival. Should have read the instruction book before it. But some people don't like to do that. You've got a backward somersault as well, you've got a sort of long jump, and these are the core game mechanics that you actually have to go through in order to do it. Here's some satellite game mechanics, when he turns into the Terminator 2 or whatever, and he's got his little sort of flying hat. These things ease everything in the game a little bit and interact with the sort of primary game mechanics in order to sometimes manipulate the outcome, yeah? Core game mechanics, again, when you think of Star Wars The Force Unleashed on the Wii, you have a sort of tutorial level where you get to play Darth Vader, yeah! And you're just kind of going through this level, killing a bunch of Wookiees. It's wonderful. And you learn absolutely everything. The Force push, the choke, lightsabers, that sort of thing. And you learn it all in this one awesome tutorial level, and that's before you even become Darth Vader's apprentice. And it all ties into the story. It is wonderfully, beautifully done. Now, you could very, very well say that a satellite game mechanic is in fact the lightning, because it's not even really particularly necessary. Because Darth Vader doesn't have it, because he's had both his arms chopped off. I suppose he could have it, but he's supposed to be the most powerful Sith, at least one of the most powerful Sith, and he doesn't even have lightning. To be perfectly honest, I would be a bit annoyed about that. But anyway, because he doesn't have hands, he's had them all chopped off in the past. But this can be seen as a sort of satellite game mechanic where you're just bzzz, you know. And even in the rise of Skywalker, it's a case of, you don't just have his power. You don't just have power. You don't just have power. You have his power. As Empress Palpatine, I wanted you here. And apparently, because she's got lightning, she's his granddaughter. So opposition mechanics, we've got Chris Walker from Outlast. We have the Xenomorph from Alien Isolation. Yes, things like that. And we have the Nemesis creature. We have Slender Man from Slender. And then of course we've got Granny. So these are opposition mechanics. Now, in these games, some of these are completely and utterly unbeatable. She's unbeatable. And the Nemesis creature in Resident Evil, he's generally unbeatable in some versions, where he just sort of appears, beats the hell out of you, and runs away. And these are opposition mechanics, just designed to obstruct you, seek you out, and destroy you. Now, this is a sort of categorization of game mechanics by Adams and Dormans. Now, I'm probably going a wee bit too much into detail here, but never mind. We have physics, economy, progression, tactical maneuvering, social interaction. These are the sort of types of game mechanic. Yeah. And these are how they're actually categorized over the different sorts of genres of game. So they've cross-referenced that. These are the genres down here: action, strategy, role play, sports, vehicle simulation, management simulation, adventure, puzzle, and social games. And these are the sorts of mechanics that you can actually see at the top: physics, economy, progression, tactical maneuvering, and social interaction. So, if we just say, for example, take one of these at random, you've got strategy games. Physics would be simple physics for movement and fighting. Economy, unit building, resource harvesting, unit upgrading, risking units in combat. Progression, scenarios to provide new sets of challenges. Tactical maneuvering, positioning of units to gain offensive or defensive advantages. Social interaction, coordinated actions, alliances, and competition between players. So yes, have a wee look at that. So, those 5 types of game mechanics, which you can see at the top here. Let's have a wee quick look at them. Physics, moving around, jumping up and down, driving vehicles, collision detection, plays a very, very large role in modern games from popular sort of first-person shooters to Angry Birds. Physics can sometimes be a cartoon, so that characters can do sort of non-Newtonian things, so they can in fact defy all gravitational law just a wee bit. So when you consider these things here, here's someone just shooting in a sort of first-person shooter game, and then you have the sort of Angry Birds cartoon physics that sort of happens. Sometimes in Angry Birds you just go woo, poof, brilliant randomization. The level just completely and utterly disintegrates. Awesome. Okay, so that's sort of physics for you, and it can look very, very real, and it can look very, very, very cartoony. Excellent. Internal economy, things like transactions, mechanics of transactions, where the game elements are collected, traded, perhaps consumed. You get things like health, food, ammunition, rupees in Zelda. Yeah. And there's a sort of example. There's the heart container from Zelda Breath of the Wild, a fabulous game. And then of course you've got an entire inventory as well, containing a number of things: clothes, weaponry, health, medical supplies, even a wheel, my god. Yep. Progression mechanics in many games, this is dictated by the level design. Level design is a big part of your course. Defeating a boss enemy perhaps, obtaining a key, levers, switches, depends on what particular cues, scaffolding, feedback, what pointers that you actually have in the game, hints, that sort of thing. Completing cups at different speeds. In Super Mario 64 DS, this was done by collecting stars to open the doors. Jumping into paintings, it was fantastic. I loved the way they did this, to be perfectly honest. It was a big castle, and then you had to jump into paintings, and you go, I see, that's how they get to the different worlds. Wonderful idea as a portal. Then, of course, you've got the different sort of tracks in Super Mario Kart, and then in terms of progression, you only ever get to the next race if you're first, second, or third. Yeah? Okay? So progression mechanics. They should probably have more progression mechanics in university courses, if you get my meaning. That way you can get people getting to level 10 and going, oh, I forgot to take a module at level 8. Anyway, progression mechanics should be more closely analysed at university level, I feel. Tactical maneuvering, dealing with the placement of game units for offensive or defensive advantages. Exists in strategy games, some role-playing games and simulation games, and many games restrict the location to discrete tiles, perhaps. So you get things like that, okay? Sort of battle simulation game. And then, of course, you've got that sort of Marvel superheroes game with all the sorts of puzzles, okay? So that's for this sort of tactical maneuvering and the strategy. Social interaction, these simulate sort of social interaction. Many online games involve reward, giving gifts, inviting friends, that sort of thing. RPGs have rules that govern the play, acting of the character perhaps, and a strategy game may involve the making and breaking of alliances perhaps, okay? So there's an example where you sort of invite friends, yeah, okay? That's a little pirating game, whatever. You're inviting friends into the game. So in terms of incredibly basic game mechanics, one of my PhD students many moons ago did a sort of PhD in formative assessments, learning analytics, and one of those things was looking at particular game mechanics as well. And she came up with this very sort of nice, simplistic presentation of the basic types of game mechanics, which I quite liked. So I've assimilated it into this presentation here. So you get points, things like leaderboards, points, rewards, endings. So there's a sort of leaderboard here. You've got another leaderboard that I sort of showed you earlier on. Rewards, and that's how they keep you sort of motivated in Hungry Shark Evolution. Come back tomorrow for your daily reward. We'll give you more gold and you wouldn't have to get your credit card out. Endings as well is another sort of important thing where they give you an appropriate ending to your character or something like that. So points, yeah, kind of basic game mechanic. Risk and reward, it could be serendipitous, could be luck, weighing the risk against the reward, for example. Here's a sort of basic track in Super Mario Kart, which you can still sort of play. Now you've got to sort of weigh up the risk and reward here. You can actually sort of cut out a section of the track. If you're coming along here and you have a mushroom, I was about to say a magic mushroom, wouldn't that be nice? If you have a mushroom, you can come here and you can press the mushroom for the boost of speed to sort of boost over here, and if you can in fact maneuver onto this, collect the coins and not go off the end, and the rewards are great. You're way ahead in the race, it's absolutely fantastic. But of course, you've got to weigh the risk against the reward, and some people are just terrible at that thing. If it goes horribly wrong, you're screwed, and you're more or less sort of out of the race. Yep. Oh, so that's kind of what it looks like, right? So you can go along here and go, oh yes, it's worked, or oh bugger, Lakitu comes and gets you. Yeah. Rainbow Road is quite a sort of famous one for that. I can't remember exactly where the bloody hell in Rainbow Road you start. Let me think. But there is a section. Oh yes, I think it's here actually. You sort of start here. And you can more or less cut out this section of the track. So this is sort of below it. So you can hit a sort of, if you get a boost, a mushroom, you can go, or wait, I think there's bits in the track that actually boost your speed. So you can in fact sort of whack over this side of the track, and then you can more or less, if you keep on pressing and time it properly, you can more or less land here, sort of reverse course, come up here and cut out that section of the track, giving you a tremendous time advantage. And if it goes well, brilliant, you're doing fantastically. And if you do it 3 times apparently, you can do this track in about 5 minutes, which is great. But if you screw it up, you're totally and utterly screwed, and you're way behind in the race. So you've got to weigh up the risk and the reward. Action points. Players are given a certain number of points to spend each turn on a wide assortment of different sorts of actions. So these points may be spent in various things, okay? According to the game rules, such as moving pieces, drawing cards, collecting money. In Fallout 3, there's a sort of Vault-Tec assisted targeting system that's part of the Pip-Boy 3000. And when it attacks, and when in this particular mode, you can choose what body parts to attack depending on your weapon. Okay? So you get things like that, action points. And it looks a bit like this. Okay? So that's a sort of basic game mechanic. So goals. Any particular method of winning. In a game's context, it really refers to goals that are not duplicated in other games, okay? So game specific. So you're trying to do away with losing, so loss avoidance when winning equals not losing. So chess, only for chess, but only games equal arriving at the end of the level without losing all lives. So it's sort of very, very general. Tetris, winning, maybe not losing. You never finish the game with you've won. That's absolutely true. And a multiplayer shooter game being the sort of last man standing, perhaps. So there's a sort of Tetris mouse map, which would be an epic fail and you're about to be screwed. Okay? So there you have it. And you can see that the white is totally winning there in the chess board. Okay? So you're really trying to capture the king in chess in many, many different ways as possible. Okay? Turns. That's another game mechanic. Can represent passage of time, defined or not. Can sort of regulate the play. One player after another, or all together in one. And a turn can be divided into phases as well. So there can be action points to spend during one's turn. So whenever. Yep. So there's a sort of more up-to-date sort of version of turn-based games, turn-based strategy games. Okay. So you get chess versus rock, paper, scissors. Then you get Dominion. Okay. Or you can skip. In fact, when you're wounded in terms of turns. So those are sort of examples. Cards and dice. You can for the purposes of perhaps randomization, you can pick a card. You can roll a dice. In Monopoly, you can get out of jail free. And then, of course, in sort of RPGs, you have this sort of thing where you can get a power up, perhaps. Okay, so that's for sort of randomization. Risk taking, we've sort of more or less discussed that. Risk and reward, weighing up the danger of risk against the chance of reward, and that's really based on sort of luck. Now, hopefully, this little fish makes it. That's all I'm saying. Races, trying to perform the same sort of task quicker. Perform more tasks in the same amount of time, for perhaps a bit of time pressure. So let's have a look at Mario Kart, and you can do sort of time trials as well. And this is a sort of interesting game where you get the most marshmallows in a takeaway box as possible in a set amount of time. Yep. There's a catch-up mechanism. Strategies for multiplayer games makes victory harder for players close to winning as well. Allow trailing players to catch up. That can be another sort of idea. Can be in the rules or played by other players as well. Okay? So when you think about it, Monopoly does the opposite. The more you win, the more you win. And what does that really say about morality? So, I mean, there you have sort of board game. Okay? Sort of board game. And then you have the sort of Mario Kart. If you're ever sort of lagging way behind in Mario Kart, you're at place 8, you always get these brilliant power-ups that will always take out everyone and try to get you to the front of the queue or the front of the race as quickly as possible. Allies and enemies, common or opposite goal. You can form alliances, teamwork, that can all be part of the mechanics as well. The game space, so it can be discrete or continuous. So you get things like tic-tac-toe, yeah? You've got pool, perhaps. How many dimensions is that going to be? You have things like Pong. So you get things like Pong, which can be two-dimensional. This, of course, can be sort of two-dimensional as well. And then you get things like three-dimensional chess. So it depends on the game space. Is it going to be discrete or, in fact, continuous? Now, in video games, permadeath can, in fact, be a game mechanic. We've discussed permadeath before. And many arcade games do, in fact, sort of have it. So things like Super Mario Land, Pac-Man, Batman Returns on the Super NES, Space Invaders as well, R-Type, and have a look at that. So, game mechanic in a sort of permadeath is in a sort of roguelike, is a sub-genre of RPGs, and essentially these, is to hinder you forever, and it's characterized by sort of dungeon crawl through, procedurally generated levels, turn-based gameplay, tile-based graphics, that sort of thing, and permanent death or permanent death of the player. So there's a high sort of fantasy narrative. Survival horror games have it as well. We've got this, we've got Don't Starve and Granny, yeah. And MMORPGs, it makes everything, and it's not entirely popular in MMORPGs, but it still exists. People don't necessarily want to be stripped of their possessions because there's a lot of their character out of existence forever because there's a lot of work that's gone into creating. So those are some of the game mechanics that you can have a look at, and later on, if you're doing a sort of honours in these particular things. But that's how you sort of think of game mechanics from now on. So, let's see. You get the sort of basic ones: points, risk, reward, action points, goals, cards, catch up, dice, turns, resource management, races, and of course the new one, sort of permadeath. Now, I think that possibly one of the sort of, you've got the different kinds of mechanics. You get the core, satellite, primary, secondary, physics. Let's see. This is a good taxonomy: physics, economy, progression, tactical maneuvering, social interaction in terms of game mechanics. And then in terms of just simply looking at particular games, think of Tetris and think of the different sort of game mechanics. Think of jumping in Mario and coming up with the different sort of game mechanics there. Think of how games are different because, let's face it, they are in fact not predetermined. And this is probably the best version, or the best sort of definition, the best way of thinking about it I can think of. Mechanics are the rules designed for the interaction with the game state, yeah? That provide the gameplay. And there we have it. So that is really what a mechanic is. So, based on rule sets that compose the logical functioning of a game. They are everything that the game is, where all the graphics, all the technology, everything is completely and utterly stripped away. And that's the way to sort of think about it. So, jumping, things like that, telekinetically moving things, obstruction, satellite sort of mechanics like the hat, allowing you to fly, gravity, screaming, reactions that you can't necessarily control, like busting into flames, that sort of thing. Okay, so hopefully that was slightly enlightening. Sorry if I babbled, it's quite late, so never mind. I shall speak to you all later, my little pals.